Morning all and welcome to another Jump Advisory recruitment discussion. As usual, if you can hear me, please feel free to put a hearty good morning in the chat box or the questions section. This week is our final week when we're talking about data and how to use that data to influence the whole of your market. And we've probably saved potentially the most important session to last, as we are looking at how we can influence the whole of your market by communicating valuable data and insight out to your clients and to your candidates and to your consultants. So this is really the new form of BD, and it should give you a competitive edge and learn how to leverage data to give you a genuine USP. So please ask questions, as the data you'll see here today is free. It's been given by MC. They normally charge this type of level of data and this type of insight. So let's introduce MC. So this is Matt, me, from a director of MC. They're a workforce intelligence solutions company. They provide market, labor, insight, and HR and analytics to the recruitment industry and professional bodies. Matt has over 20 years of HR experience and has a passion for people analytics and workforce return on investment. So Matt, welcome to Jump. Thank you very much for all your input into this webinar. The floor is all yours, but as usual, the Jump team will be posing questions as we go along, but we prefer on this one for the audience to ask questions. So guys, please feel free to ask away. Don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat box. So Matt, that just leaves me to say thank you very much. Over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Howard. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So there's loads of data that's about to come your way, and I'm going to run through it at pace, but a couple of topics. So we're going to talk about, first of all, headlines in the UK labour market, some things you might know, some things you probably won't know, and it'd be interesting to get your views on that. Really useful insight for you to have this sort of understanding of the overall UK economy when you're having conversations with clients, or prospects for that matter. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about more granular data about how some of our recruitment sector clients are using that data and kind of visualize that. So we'll really try and bring it to life. So let's get straight into it. So challenging period, right? We've all had quite a year, I think you'll all agree. So where are we in terms of sort of those macro trends? So nearly 750,000 people less on PAYE as they were a year ago as we entered the first lockdown. But signs of slight recovery there, in that's taken a turn for the better in the last reporting period, with 83,000 more now on payroll, which is good news. The unemployment rate is currently at 5.1%. That was, if you roll back to about June of last year, the Bank of England and other sort of economic institutes were really forecasting probably nearer 7.5% by this time. So actually we're in a better place than many people feared we'd be. But one thing to highlight there is, and we're going to go into a bit more detail on this, is around youth unemployment, and that's an area of real concern. Obviously we've got the Kickstart programme that's in motion trying to address that. Claimant counts, we're at 2.6 million. Worth highlighting here, there is the transition that's ongoing to universal credit. So those numbers are slightly inflated for how they would previously have been presented. But that number has more than doubled in the time frame since COVID started. And in terms of overall vacancies across the UK market, for those of you that follow that data, we'll go into it in a bit more detail. But about 600,000 vacancies. We actually were much lower than that, sort of in the early periods of the lockdown. But we are seeing signs of recovery. So some useful headlines, I hope. If we get into a bit more detail here, so this is data that looks at unemployment rather than claimant counts, and also vacancy levels. So what you can see here on the chart is, as we entered sort of the lockdown period, we were around the 800,000 vacancies level, and that really tanked and dropped down to the lowest levels on record, down to 343,000 as we were kind of in the peak of that first lockdown. But we've seen a steady and gradual increase in vacancy levels, and reporting period upon reporting period, we've seen a steady increase there, although a bit of a slowdown in the most recent period. And you can see kind of what's happening with unemployment levels as well. So what we're really looking for over the course of the next few months is, to what extent do these two data sets start to converge, and do vacancies start to overtake unemployment levels? I mentioned youth unemployment, and this is obviously we've got sort of the headline stats. And for those of you that aren't aware, youth unemployment currently is at 14.2%. That's increased from 12.1% in the earlier parts of the lockdown. But what's really sort of interesting here, you've actually got nearly 600,000 people in that age bracket who aren't working. You've also got an increase in economic inactivity levels in that part of the workforce. But we're really seeing from a diversity perspective that, and again, you've got to bear in mind proportional population here, but there are certain ethnic groups that are definitely struggling. The younger part of the population are really struggling to get into employment. So there are some opportunities here, I think, for us in terms of the sector of how do we help to mobilize talent in different communities in different parts of the country. So interesting to get any questions or comments on that in terms of what a recruiter's doing to help readdress this balance. And then lastly, from I guess, when we look at lead indicators, well, what's happening in terms of structural changes of work? One of the things the ONS report on is redundancy levels, and no surprise that these have been rising throughout the pandemic. We've got initial signs of decline here in terms of volumes, but you can see, we're sort of over the 350,000 redundancies in the reporting period in September to November, and that's just over 300,000 from October to December. So really important lead indicator as we come out of lockdown and we start to see different sectors of the economy making decisions on what are they going to do with their workforce. Are there still jobs? Is what happens to these numbers? Very good news, of course, that furlough has been extended, and I think we're going to run into a bit of furlough data just now. When we look at furlough, and I'm sure many of you have tracked some of this, but what's really interesting and what I've done on these charts is look at how's furlough changed over time. So if we looked at the May period, and kind of the middle of May was when furlough was really at its peak. We had in total, I think, about 8.8 million on furlough at that peak. And you can see this is by SIC1 industry sector, the number of furlough counts, a number of people that are placed on furlough in that May period. And then the orange bar really shows where people are in the latest data set, which runs to the end of January. Obviously, this data is released each month. So what we're really interested in is the difference between the bars. So to what extent is a sector recovering and putting people back into work? So you can kind of see, the manufacturing sector is doing slightly better than other sectors like accommodation and food services. No surprise there. But we're seeing other sectors, arts and recreation, information and IT, where there's kind of, there is clearly a greater impact of lockdown on their sector. So more people are still on furlough, and those are the sectors we really want to watch. It'll be really interesting to know the sectors that you guys work in, how are you seeing that play out on the ground in terms of, are people back at work and is business back in motion, or is it still kind of in wait and see mode?
Matt, quick question on that. The and it may because it's just sideways. I'm trying to sort of tilt my head. Is the hospitality sector on there? Because I'm just curious to know how that's fared.
Yeah, in accommodation and food services.
Oh, right. Yeah. So that's still quite high then, in terms of which you'd expect, I guess. Yeah. In terms of the number of people still on furlough. So I guess that's suggesting that's still a sector that is still. I guess.
I think so, and I think we'll see. There are some sectors we know are just going to take longer to respond because of the direct impact that that the virus has had, particularly where you've got the need for face-to-face contact. They're going to be slower sectors to recover, essentially.
Matt, do you think? I mean, looking at the whole furlough situation, which is I think an issue, because obviously it's been moved on till September, which is good news. But are we looking at a sort of long tail in terms of unemployment? Are we now looking at just delaying a spike in unemployment? Is it going to be the case that when we get into the back end of the year, we're going to see a lot of people being laid off, particularly in areas around hospitality, as you've just mentioned? Is that something that we should expect to see?
I mean, I think it's too soon to answer that, if I'm honest, because I think it's going to be a sector by sector approach, and we're going to have to see the extent to which business can get back to normal in those face-to-face contact industries. and there are too many unknowns. We all hear Chris Whitty and the various teams talking about, being cautious. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see for that. I think what I expect will actually happen is, if in certain sectors that business can't get back to normal, I think we'll see another extension of furlough. And that's the precedent that seems to have been set by the Chancellor, is that we're going to protect jobs. We know that that's going to have a longer term impact in terms of overall budget deficits, but their mission right now seems to be protect jobs. Will that change as a policy? I'm not sure.
And if you looked at the if you had to make a prediction in terms of percentage of unemployment, I think certainly a lot of people have talked in terms of 7.5% moving up towards 8%. Is that kind of the peak that you would anticipate, or do you see any change to that?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer with full confidence, because no one really knows. If you look at the OECD predictions across international markets, that their latest prediction for the UK was around about 10%. The latest revisions from Bank of England and the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said about 7.5%. But everyone's second guessing this, right? And I think honestly, it's going to be we're just going to have to watch the data. And one of the things that's been really interesting when we look at redundancies, so you have the HR1 disclosure forms, which is very tightly guarded data where companies are making 20 or more redundancies at any one time. That's data we'd love to get our hands on, but we can't get our hands on, because that is probably the best lead indicator of what's coming down the pipe. I'm sure within Whitehall and various government circles, they have a good handle on that data.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, if I can, I'd be interested in some comments on this, and this is just around the self-employed income support scheme. So I'm sure you guys know, and there's many self-employed people in the recruitment sector, but obviously we've had about 1.9 million claims through this support scheme, and this is broken down by industry sector. I think a couple of things is to highlight the sectors that are most prevalent in making those claims. So the construction sector, I love that the ONS have unknown and other as our second biggest category, which isn't that helpful, but a real mix of right across the economy. People who are self-employed have said, I'm going to take this because there's been such uncertainty. And if you look at the take-up rate, we kind of average at around 60% of people in those self-employed sectors who've participated in the programme, with obviously a couple of areas peaking, transport and storage, again, other service activities, which probably includes the recruitment sector. So it'd be great to get a view from this audience of how many of you are self-employed and how many of you have taken advantage of this scheme. Any comments on that one?
Of course, this has been extended now, hasn't it? It's been ratified at the budget, and it's going into this year as well. So I think, one of the challenges around the self-employed income support scheme was the fact that it precluded people that had set up business fairly recently. Hopefully, with it being extended now, then people that have set up in the last 12 months, then they can apply for that. Is there any thought, Matt, around, again, I understand what you're saying around predicting or trying to predict what's going to happen. Is there any thought whether that 60% is going to go down or go up or stay the same?
I think it will vary by sector again. I mean, it's not dissimilar to the furlough scheme, in that where businesses are able to get back to work and start earning money. And I think lockdown 3.0, we've seen across the board in all of our sort of customer sectors a lot more confidence, and it feels like people they've planned for this now, other than where there's that face-to-face contact. So my sense is these numbers will go down, particularly as we get through probably the next phase of vaccination. But again, if I had that crystal ball and I could tell you 100%, I'd be a wealthy man on a beach.
Only a beach down the road, of course.
Was someone asking a question there? I can't hear you if you are.
Dave, if you can hear us, Dave, you're not coming through very well on the voice. I don't know whether you've got a bad connection there or not. So I think Dave Power was trying to ask a question there. If you want to type it, Dave, we can answer it from there. But I've got a question that's come in from one of the audience that they're worried about the extension of furlough. Could make a recovery or the economic recovery sluggish in delaying recruitment plans for some sectors?
Potentially it could. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there are so many moving parts to this. But if an organisation has still got a big proportion of its workforce on furlough, they're probably not going to be actively hiring at that point, because they're still in the wait and see mode, would be my sense. That said, if you look at the rec data on jobs and kind of confidence levels, you look at the CIPD and the DECO insights, confidence levels are much higher than they were. The intention to recruit data, I haven't put anything in here in this presentation, but there seems to be a lot more positivity in the market than there was, even though, and I say that job posting levels, which we'll talk about in a sec, are dropping a little bit. We are seeing new activity and new emergence. I just signed off today the press release that goes out tomorrow for the jobs recovery tracker, and we're seeing new sectors that are starting to come back into play. We've got a lot happening in sort of the DIY world. Checker Trade are going mad in terms of their job posting activity. So, and we're also seeing the first signs of hospitality starting to hire again. Low volumes, but definitely things happening.
Yeah, and I think when we talk to our clients as well, Matt, the news over the last 4 to 5 weeks has been much more encouraging. I think January was pretty tough for a lot of people. I think not just in terms of business climate, but also I think it was a tough month, sort of almost psychologically, having to go back into yet another lockdown when people were hoping we were beyond that. February was a little bit better, but certainly, talking to my colleagues and my clients, the news has been much more upbeat. Certainly over the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've got clients now getting levels of vacancies in that they haven't seen for quite some period of time. And I think the other, I would couple that with the fact that people are beginning, and I'm talking employees, to feel a little bit more comfortable about changing jobs. Whereas the sense last year was people were sort of hunkering down, just pleased to have a job. I think they're now in this situation where they're beginning to think about moving on.
I think that sounds right to me, and it'd be interesting to get other views. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to crack on through a few more data sets. So a couple of other things here, and I think there's some really interesting insight here around if we think about the structure of the UK workforce and how that's changing. So first of all, to set the context for that, we've obviously got a new immigration system, points-based system now post Brexit. What happened, and just to quickly explain the slide, so you've got different types of visa approvals that happen when we bring labour into the country. What happened in lockdown is obviously in that particular period in Q2 2020, an absolute shutdown on visas pretty much, and you can see that pretty much across the board. Unprecedented in history that would happen, for obvious reasons. But then if you look across the board, obviously that's picked up a little bit here. But if you look at the shape of the type of visas that are being processed, that for me is really interesting. So high value visas, so kind of at senior level, have kind of been in decline over the period of time. Skilled worker visas seem to be on the rise and sort of getting back to some kind of normal. But what's really interesting at the lower end of the job market is if you look at the trend for temporary visas and how that seems to be shrinking and contracting over time, going to be interesting to watch how that changes. And that leads really nicely into understanding, well, where are the pain points going to be in different parts of the workforce? Because if you're an employer, your perspective is, well, there's loads more people who are looking for work now because there's been redundancies and there's greater claimant count. So surely, recruiters, you can fill my vacancies. And the answer is, well, that depends. So I think we've got a polarized labour market happening. And at the lower end, if you look at the nature of foreign workers in the UK workforce, so the actual total workforce in the UK has declined by over 500,000 people in this period. And this is from October 2019 to December 2020. But if we look at the shape of that workforce in terms of nationality, you can see we've actually had a big decline of EU nationals. So a lot of people have left the country. They've gone home, repatriated and said, right, with Brexit and COVID, I'm out of here. And then we can break that down for those of you that aren't familiar with the different terminology here. And I don't know it brilliantly myself, I've got to say, but you're talking about in the EU, 227,000 people. That's from Bulgaria and Romania. And then you have the accession countries, the EU 88, which is kind of your Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, those types of nations. So we're really seeing a sharp decline in that part of the available workforce to do work in the UK. Whereas some of the other parts of the workforce or other parts of the demographic, if you like, nationality, are increasing. So we have more people from America and Australia and New Zealand, etc. And actually an increase in workforce participation from UK nationals. So I think particularly at the lower end of the labour market, that's where there's going to be significant pain. I think the highly skilled and the new point system at the highly skilled end of the market will enable that. And what we'll really probably need to see from government is continued action to try and address that lower end. Does that all make sense to everyone? And that's kind of the end of the first bit of presentation. So I'll pause and just see if there are any questions at a macro level.
I think we'll move on to the questions at the end on that macro level, because I think obviously this is the bit that the guys are really looking at, is how recruiters are going to use the data and how we can sort of take that data to the next stage to attract both candidates and clients and increase our, I suppose, our market share.
Yeah. So I should have put headers on these. So these are the data sets that our clients use in terms of what can we look at day to day in the recruitment market, in the labour market, to help inform recruitment activity and recruitment insight. So we've got demand, supply, reward, diversity and skills. Those are the things that clients are interested in. And then we've got how recruiters use that data for different parts of their business life cycle. So essentially help with sales, produce marketing collateral, help engage and have better conversations with customers or prospects, help complete tenders and RFPs, and then help with what I call pre-sourcing. We don't get into the world of helping people find CVs. We help provide the insight that says, where might we be looking?
When we start to look at that data that you're talking about there, if you just go back onto that slide.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, when we start to talk about that data, looking at the clients that use you from the recruitment market, what part of this data set are they demanding most of that helps them to either attract or retain new clients?
Yeah, so without a doubt, Howard, demand data, because you need to know who's hiring and what's going on in the marketplace. Reward data, I need to know what's happening to pay. What are my competitors up to? What is company X paying for this type of role? And then probably less so diversity data and skills data. Diversity being, and I'll show a particular use case of this, is what does good recruitment practice look like? What data do I need to have when I'm presenting a short list of CVs to say this is a good diverse shortlist based on market insight and based on the demographics of the workforce in a particular part of the economy? Skills is a really hot topic for us and is a really hot topic in the HR world, because understanding skills availability, talent availability through a skills lens is only going to become more important, I think, in the months and years ahead, because skills are the building blocks that people need to get work done. And I think COVID has changed how people think about work. And it's actually, I don't need to hire a person to do this job. I need a bunch of people with these skills to get these tasks done.
Good comment from me, Matt. I think I keep talking about this on previous webinars, but the data is for me the starting point for the conversation. Whether you're trying to break into a client, data is the logic bit where you're trying to build that trusted relationship. If you've got a relationship, it's how you're going to elevate the conversations and have a more meaningful meeting with a HR director or somebody quite senior, because you're sharing insights about what's either coming or thought leadership about what might happen. And that's different to just taking an order. So if people are listening to this and they're not using data, they absolutely should be thinking about how they can present some of this information and advise clients on what's going on.
100%.
I agree, Paul. I would add to the great point you've made and say that I think it really is about trying to get our clients to anticipate the trends. It's absolutely an imperative to feed them current information, but I think you've got to go beyond that point. You've got to be talking about what ifs.
Yeah.
What's going to happen in 6 months? What if this happens? What if that happens? And I think it's that kind of conversation that stimulates the relationship. Instead of becoming a provider of staffing only, you become a trusted advisor, which we've talked about endlessly. And I think this kind of data is there. And I would add, I think this is phenomenally good data that we're witnessing, we're seeing from Matt. There is equally good data relative to your territories if you're a regional recruiter, or indeed digging deeper and deeper into the sectoral, can't get the word out today, information that is evident as well.
Before we jump into the data, if we've got time, just one thing, we also work in what I call the people analytics industry. And that's, so if you think of large organizations who've been grappling with their own workforce data for a while now, what's happening slowly is that they are integrating external data with their internal workforce data to try and understand context. And we've got a number of tenders and partners in that space. So the market is evolving. So HR directors are not just interested in understanding their own workforce. They're interested in comparing that to how do we compare to the market in terms of skills, in terms of pay, in terms of who's doing what. And that's where the people analytics industry is heading. And it's, the train has left the station. I mean, that is happening.
So if we go back to what we've been saying all the way through these webinars, that data is the new gold, it's the new oil, etc. That demand, supply and reward data becomes really interesting for the owners of business, the HR businesses. They start to plan their sort of growth of their company, and then skills and diversity start to then sector it out of how well you've done with regards to the diversity side or the skills side to ensure that you can actually supply. And that means from a recruitment point of view that I can look at my client set and start to look at my demand, supply and reward sector, but then start to look at the skill sector on my CRM and say, have I got the right number of people that can actually feed the clients that I'm working with? So it gives the both sides of the coin for our recruitment owners, gives you the client data that you want, but it also gives an understanding of your data. Is your data good enough to actually service the clients that you're currently working with now and in the the
Yeah, 100%. Should we dive into it, Howard?
Yeah, let's dive into the data. Yeah, there's lots of data coming out next.
I mean, just a few, and again, we're just going to, there's lots of detail in here that you guys can view afterwards. But first of all, was looking at the pivot that many recruitment businesses have done. And if you don't look at this report on a monthly basis, recommend you do. This is the job vacancies report. It breaks down hiring activity across the UK by sector. So ultimately, where is their growth versus where is their less growth, or where is their decline? And you can see, no surprise, we've got the healthcare sector top of the charts. We're seeing a real resurgence in what's termed as the professional, scientific and technical activities. So that's obviously part healthcare and pharmaceuticals, but it's also the digital world. So really useful to know where is their growth opportunities and how do we break this down. What we do is then roll that on to look at real-time market insights, because government data is useful, but there's always a lag to it. And, it's a big data set. You can never get to the nuggets. So we break that down. And here's an example, of what I've termed, this is our unique job postings. Job postings are a measure of market activity. We aggregate about 1.5 million job postings a month, just to give us a snapshot of what's going on right now. And this is new postings, deduplicated, what happened in February by job title and the volume of postings. So you can see, no surprise that we've got the key workers and healthcare sector. The NHS always dominates hiring activity across the UK. But you'll see, if you all tip your heads to one side and sort of have a glance through this list, you'll see there's a real divergence of where is the market recovering, who's actually actively hiring now. And we can filter this down by recruiter, right the way down to who are the employers that are hiring. One sort of note of point, about 65 to 70% of job postings in the UK are posted by recruiters. So not only can you look at your competitors, but you can also look at who are your potential targets and prospects. So that's how our recruitment sector clients use this data. Let me canter through this and then we'll run some questions. Now, national level is really interesting. And what I've done is just a sample of 4 government office regions here to say, well, what's the difference in activity? Again, this is the same February period, but different parts of the country, their economies are different, their businesses that are hiring are different. So again, you can see support workers is the top posting activity in all of those 4 areas, but it's actually, it changes as you look at each region. So all of a sudden in London, we've got quantity surveyors that are coming through. What I've also put on these charts is not just the volume of postings, which is the orange line, but also the median advertised salary, because what you also want to know is what's happening to pay. And some of the things, Howard, you and I talked about yesterday, we're looking at regional differences in pay and understanding, well, how does that affect us as a recruitment business? Because you need to understand who's hiring and what are they paying to really know how you position your business. I'll carry on and then we'll just do questions at the end. Drilling that down to employer. So this is a quick snapshot from December through to the end of February of the organisations that were posting most often and how much they were paying. So again, NHS always top of the pops, although actually in this week's jobs recovery tracker, they're not top for the first time in terms of new postings over the last week, which is pretty cool. So you'll have to read that press release to see that. Again, I assume recruitment business owners will know and have a handle, and we update this every day to say who's hiring now. So in the last day, who's posted for a job. Good data to know. So you know you're prioritizing your sales efforts and you're talking to the right people. Couple of examples from another side. So I mentioned the skills angle, and one of the things that we can do, we have skills language, about 30,000 unique skills, so we can analyze what's going on in the market, supply and demand, through a skills lens. So this actually looks at the world of software and programmers and software developers, and I've just looked at this again. You've got the total unique postings, so what skills are in highest demand across the nation. Again, this was from December through February. And then what's happening, what pay observations can we make about those skills in the market in terms of average salary. So again, really useful if you've got CVs or candidates you're representing to understand that market demand and go, well, what's the market pay level based on advertised rates for those kind of roles. And we can do this another way as well, is looking at the supply side. This I've used our profiles data, it's about 16 million anonymous profiles to look at, and there's a couple of different use cases for this. So when you've got a brief and you're thinking about which companies am I going to target, this is actually looking at the Python skill, which is a software language coding skill. Where might I find these candidates who have these skills? But it also might be, if you're representing a candidate, what are the organizations that are looking for these skills that I might want to market a candidate to? So several different ways you can use that kind of insight. Last one is that I mentioned diversity, and again, I've used this in the same instance of software development. So when you're presenting that shortlist, or you're having that conversation with a hiring manager about, okay, we're looking for someone X. Well, do you understand the context of the workforce there? So my screen's gone a bit strange. Hope it's okay your side. So this looks at the age profile of that workforce segment. So this is specifically for the SOC group of what we call programmers and software developers. What's the gender split? So you're presenting a short list. What's a reasonable and fair balance from a gender perspective, and also what's the ethnicity mix of that part of the workforce? So all useful data when you're having what can obviously be sometimes difficult conversations with clients about the work you're working on. I think that was it. I hope we're all right for time, and happy.
We've got plenty of time for plenty of questions. I know that the guys, I'm looking at sort of both Paul's and Dave, they're all sort of chomping at the bit. I've got a question that's sort of come into sort of before there. When we start to go back at looking at the data, you looked at the 4 data sets from regionalised data, and you looked at sort of the data sets from individual roles. I presume what you're saying is that irrespective what type of recruitment agency I am, if I came to you and talked to, could I have a data set on this type of roles or these type of roles, you'd be able to create that data that would give me instant insight for my regional area, my localized area, national area, etc., by sector and by job.
So we, yes is the answer. We start our data build, Howard, with what we call SIC and SOC codes, standard industry, standard occupation classifications, and then we enrich that with profiles and postings data. Because of how we tag and kind of organize that data, you can really get into the weeds of what's going on, particularly from an occupation point of view. Industry is a bit more tricky, because if you think about industry, if you take a project manager might work in any industry. So we always start with occupation tagging, and then we can map that back to what we call our staffing patterns, that looks at the overall size of the workforce across different industry sectors.
Okay. So you'd be able to actually have a full understanding if you were, say, pitching to a client, or you were looking at how you develop your database, of what's hot and what's not within the marketplace.
Yeah, most definitely, yeah.
Okay. So that's good to know, because that's the sort of thing that when we've been talking for the last 2 or 3 weeks now about using data for consultants, using data for clients, then using data to sort of really entice clients to work with you. And what you're saying is that the way the clients are currently working at the moment is that they're not just looking at their current client base, their employee base. They're looking at the regional employee base in that marketplace to see whether they're paying the right salaries. You know, what's the footfall within that marketplace of headcount, etc. You know, do they need to move markets, etc. And I'll look at the technology point of view. I've had a lot of companies talking to me about they're going away from, let's say, .NET to something else, because the competition for staff in that marketplace is so hot. And they basically can't get staff. So it gives you a good opportunity to really go and have a full conversation that's not about recruitment, but about the overall market and how you can help them influence that market to provide staff to you.
Yeah, it makes sense, Howard. I think the other thing that's fundamentally changing, I wouldn't say it's changed, is place. You know, and we do quite a lot of work in the commercial real estate world, and if you think about how organizations are thinking about offices, what used to be, you know, I need someone within a 30-minute commute to my office, is no longer the same. Now it's different for different jobs, but that is a fundamental reset. And we've got clients that are looking not just across the UK, but are saying, look, internationally, I can manage people remotely. We've learned how to do it now. So I don't need to just think about talent that can commute into my office. And the purpose of office space is, in some sectors, fundamentally going to change.
So to talk about that from an international point of view, because I was just about to ask the question, then Colin's asked the question as well. Can you then provide data that's outside the UK?
Yeah, we do. We have great data in the UK, US, and Canada at a very granular level that looks at government data and big data sets. But we also have a platform that we call NG Global. So that covers 47 countries at the moment. We have about 190 million anonymous profiles in there, job postings, data, government data estimates. Not as granular as we have in the UK, but for strategically understanding what skills will I find on the planet and where. Yes, we do. And we invest in it heavily. We've got a team of 10 or so people who build that platform in the US.
Matt, could I just raise a question with you? One of the things you pointed out was the diminishment of people coming into the country from abroad and returning home. And I think anybody that's listening that's involved in blue collar workers, to use that expression, industrial workers, will have absolutely witnessed that. Brexit being one of the major reasons, I suspect.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about, how do these people get replaced? Because as the economy starts to come back, as we expect towards the end of the year, there's going to be a real skill shortage. Do you have any take on this? A lot of people mentioned over a period of time that industrial workers will become far more automized, and therefore people will be replaced by machinery, etc., robots, etc. What's your take on this particular issue? Because it's a really big issue for the economy.
Yeah, it's a really tough one to grapple with, and I think it's going to be dependent on a lot of lobbying from different industry groups. I mean, I saw on the news this week, the the daffodils across the country aren't going to get to the shops because there's not enough people to pick them, right? I mean, and so I think, you know, this is where lobbying and groups like the REC are really important, but also, you know, the industry bodies that represent, it's ultimately how agile and how flexible is our new immigration point system going to be to respond to those skill shortages. And I think there's a difference between labour and talent and kind of the type, how we describe the different parts of the workforce. But what we need is work to get done, be it that's picking flowers or picking crops or, so there's a whole range of very complex issues that Brexit, you know, it's gone very quiet about Brexit, hasn't it? But yeah, that is a fundamental change that's going to hurt certain industries. I hope that the government is agile in responding to that, because it's all about speed, because otherwise industries will really suffer and industries might die, you know, let's be honest.
Yeah, and I think one of the key issues here, and it's been, you know, I'm not saying something that hasn't been constantly discussed, are pay rates. So, you know, a lot of these areas of industry have relied on very cheap labor, you know, minimum wage. And so therefore, there is going to be tremendous pressure, I think, on government to be looking at minimum wage rates and increasing pay rates in order to encourage people to get back to work, to go and work in these areas. So I think you can expect, I suspect you can expect to see a lot of noise around all of this as we start to move away from the pandemic in these particular areas. If I reverse the coin, where would you see the surge in employment opportunities over the next 2 to 3 years based on the current data?
I mean, I think we'll see in kind of the professional, scientific digitization parts of the economy. I think we'll see it in energy and green energy. And we know we've seen from various government announcements where money is being placed, right? I think the Kickstart scheme as well is going to be, has the potential to be really important for the nation if we get it right. So I mean, high level, that's where I'd probably suggest. Now, we also do quite a bit of work with professional bodies, and if I look at some of the catapults and sort of the investment in high value manufacturing and those kind of skills, so yeah, that's where I think if I almost think, I don't know if you've read the industrial strategy, which I think, you know, current iteration was pretty light in terms of detail. That's where I think it feels like we're heading, and hopefully the government will be clearer on that in terms of here are the sectors we're going to invest in and how much and how that's going to roll through to job creation, because that's what's going to need to happen. You know, we're going to have a very big tax burden at the end of this period, and somehow that's going to have to be repaid, and that's going to, you know, to do that you need a productive economy. So yeah, investment will lead to that, I think.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you can hear me, but have you seen, or do you envisage in the next 12 months much of a change in the shape of the labour market in terms of temporary jobs versus permanent jobs? Because obviously with all the talk about IR35, there was a fear that obviously there'll be less temporary workers. The companies I'm speaking to haven't seen any evidence of that. They've seen their contract numbers, their temporary numbers grow.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, it's amazing these things that have gone quiet, isn't it? Brexit and IR35, you know, somewhat distracted. I mean, initially, and I'd say towards sort of the last quarter of last year, we were seeing a rise in temporary market activity. And again, that's using job postings insight as we can look at that from temp, perm, contract, freelance, you name it. That was on the rise, but certainly we've seen more recently in the first couple of months of this year, more permanent activity starting to grow, and I've certainly read that in other research that we look at. So if your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I think organizations are going to be very cautious, and for me the common sense approach is, look, probably more temp and contract hiring, but the IR35 almost sends them the other way, doesn't it? So it's you've almost got a seesaw here of saying, well, place your bets. What do you want to do? I don't know, if I'm really honest, quite which way it will go. I think we'll see a bit of everything.
As we're coming to sort of towards the end, I've got a question here from one of the attendees, from Robin, that the data shows an equal impact on unemployment at the younger end of the market, but has there been similar unequal impact at the older end of the market, i.e. the 50 plus people. So he wants your thoughts and views on the future of that group.
Yeah, I'd have to have a closer look at the data to answer that one, if I'm honest, Howard. Yeah, my sense is, we're an aging population and we're all going to be working longer, all that we all hoped. I don't think the 65 or 66 is in my horizon in terms of retirement, unless I get lucky with something. But yeah, I think it's really important that we don't just focus on one part of the labour market. I think we have to look holistically at it. And certainly the older population, we're all going to be working longer across the nation, I suspect.
Okay. Guys, any more questions from the board? Because obviously we're now sort of running out of time, and I want to sort of make sure that we answer every question that we can do, or we move on. So guys, any questions?
Howard, there's one question here from Richard. What movement has your data shown on median salary ranges across various sectors?
Again, something I probably have to have a look into. We can pinpoint the distribution and change of salaries over time, but it takes a bit of crunching to do that. My sense is we're seeing a steady increase, but nothing too dramatic. But we have to get into the weeds of looking at specific jobs and specific markets to really get under the skin of that. If you think about this from an organizational perspective, I can't imagine many finance directors jumping up and down saying, we want to give big pay rises. And we've all seen the debates this week around the NHS pay rises, right? So I think it's going to be conservative. It's going to be very prudent financial management. And I think that's probably true across the board.
I guess just to sort of finish on hopefully a high note here, we are moving towards the end of this situation, at least the immediate sort of crisis, moving into a different stage now, hopefully growth. A lot of the economists, including the Bank of England, have been very optimistic about the prospects for the country towards the back end of this year and into next year and onwards. Based on the data you consistently crunch on a daily basis, what's your prediction for the next 18 months to 2 years? I'll put you on the spot, Matt.
I'm going to the beach again, I think, Paul, if I have. It's a really, I think anyone that is prepared to say this is what's going to happen, and they're only setting themselves up to be shot down. I honestly think we've just got to keep a handle of what's changing right now. I think there's optimism right now in terms of lockdown 3.0. We all want to see the vaccine rollout completed. I think if I was a recruiter and running a recruitment business, I would be looking to keep, look at where the growth opportunities are going to come and make sure my business is well positioned to leverage those, because there are going to be sectors and parts of the economy that will grow and will continue to get investment in. So that's where I'd make sure my business is aligned to.
Matt, as always, some great information and some absolute unbelievable data there that, if you can use that data, guys out there listening, to help procure clients and work with your clients, then, feel free to look at that data. Next week, we're going to track, really sort of look at a completely different area. We know that recruitment in the recruitment sector, actually getting people to work for you, is going to increase, which means there's going to be different things that are going to come in that we need to look at. So next week, we're going to have Simon Block on from JMW, which is a law practice, and he's going to be looking at the potential changes to the restrictive covenants law. And I can guarantee the four of us will absolutely put our hands up and say most calls that come to us about people leaving a business is about the restrictive covenants law. So that's going to come in. So the questions are going to be really, is the contract that you've got written, is it worth the paper that it's actually written on? And are you actually safeguarding your business from bad leavers? And how do you properly engage with your new colleagues with regards to drafting terms and conditions before you start? I'm sure you've been seeing all the posts going out on LinkedIn about what we're launching on Friday, our new initiative. So please keep looking out for those. It's coming on Friday, so don't ask us because we won't tell you. But as the market's picking up, we know it's very busy out there, and we're helping lots of agencies at the moment implement lots of business strategies to keep them competitive within the marketplace and give them the advantage when the actual green light actually flickers on and we all go. So if you want to discuss how we can develop your strategy, feel free to give us a call and work up on that. That just leaves us to say thank you again, Matt, much appreciated. Thanks everybody from attending. That's me say thank you. Have a great week. And as the evening gets lighter, enjoy your week. We look forward to seeing you again next week.
See you guys. Bye, everybody. Bye. Stay safe. Stay safe.